Hi, everyone. This is Elizabeth Ramsey at Instruction Partners, and I'm so excited today to be talking to Leigh Bozard, the Executive Director for the Emerge School for Autism. And she's going to share her perspective with us as part of our Rethinking Intervention series. Leigh, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm hoping that you can start us off with a personal story of a student that really informs your perspective about what the work of helping students accelerate learning requires.
Sure. So when I taught at the Emerge School years ago, I taught a small kindergarten class, all students with autism and special needs. And we had one student with autism who the interventions we were doing weren't really effective. We were having, the data wasn't moving, we weren't moving the mark, and we weren't being effective. And we were looking at it from trying to figure out what the perspective was. But there were a variety of issues. It wasn't just the data on the paper. And so when you walked in this classroom, sometimes you would see this child try to climb the walls like Spider-Man and leap off of them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you would see him roll himself up into my circle time carpet like a burrito.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was all a part of what made up this child and who he was. Well, our occupational therapist came in and saw that, and she said, we really need to be spinning him. We need to put together, I'll put together a protocol for you to implement and follow, with my guidance, but he needs vestibular input that he's not getting. Mm-hmm. And so with the protocol she put in place, he was able to sit at the table and do the interventions and do the academic work, whereas he wasn't before. So just looking at straight data on paper doesn't give you the full picture. We have a phrase that the world of autism uses, that you've met one child with autism and you've met one child with autism. Mm-hmm. And that's true for children in general. Children are all unique individuals, and we really need to look at the bigger picture and the whole child to see what they need.
Yeah, that's such a great story. Thank you so much for sharing. And as we think about, I'm struck by these needs of each unique child. Mm-hmm. And we are certainly in a unique circumstance nationally right now as we head into school this fall. What do you think teachers need to be prepared for? And specifically, what challenges should they be prepared for when students return to learning in the fall?
Well, I think the obvious is potential learning gaps, right? Regardless of how robust a school's distance learning program was, many children still required the parents or adults in their household to help them. And if they didn't have that, they just didn't have that. Mm-hmm. And parents are not educators. And even educators that are parents, myself included, that's not our role with our children. And so it makes a big difference. I think that keeping that in mind, particularly for students with special needs and students in K through 2. I haven't seen a lot of, students in K through 2 and students with special needs very often need an educational program and model that can be very hands-on, that can be very kinesthetic. And these distance learning programs that we've put together this spring don't offer that a lot. So we need to be very mindful when we're thinking about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard some schools talking about, figuring out how many students they'll be able to have in the building with social distancing, and a lot of schools thinking about prioritizing bringing back their K2 students and their special education students and instructionally vulnerable to make sure that those groups of students get the in-person learning time. But there's still so much to figure out with distance for all students, right? Because it's gonna be a combination no matter what.
Right.
And knowing, thinking about the learning needs that you're talking about being greater, very frequently we use intervention as a solution for this in education. And I would love to hear just what you have seen works in intervention and what you would hope to see school and system leaders prioritize in their response.
Well, the short answer to that is very specific interventions based on student need. The example I gave before, the data isn't just the only answer. Looking at the bigger picture, one size fits all interventions aren't successful for students in schools because one size doesn't fit all. The data may show that these 4 children all have similar challenges, but then when you step back and you talk to that child's teacher about what does this look like in the classroom, how does this portray, the reasons behind it can be very different, and that will change the interventions that you choose for that student. At our school, every student has an individualized education program. I think that in intervention, we need to move toward very individualized interventions for students based on their specific needs.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about finding the bigger picture, because yes, I hear people talk all the time, like you do the screener, you see the assessment, right? Finding that bigger picture, you mentioned talking to the teacher. What are some of the ways that you form that bigger picture for yourself, or the educators do that?
I think asking the questions, what does this look like in the classroom? What does, where does the child sit? How do they act when given this intervention? How do they act when they're frustrated? What does this look like when the child is given up? And what happens to lead up to all of those things?
Mm-hmm.
I think the puzzle piece is used in autism as a symbol because autism, is very complex and can look very different in very different children that all can have the same diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if we think about intervention more in that way, we'll find more success. Do we have enough pieces of the puzzle? Have we searched for those pieces of the puzzle to look to where we may not have all of them, but enough that we can see the picture behind of what's going on?
That's really helpful. And I'm hearing so much in your response about the whole child, how they respond to the world around them, like how each child being unique. What do you think the role is of that during this time, knowing that we've been in crisis, that we have students who've experienced trauma? How should educators be thinking about that?
I think that this is it's cliche to say, but it's unprecedented. The trauma that the levels of trauma that children are going to experience are going to be different, and they're going to present in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of it will present as academic challenges, some of it will certainly present as behavioral, some of it will present as they're regressing emotionally, psychologically. We work on toileting a lot in our special needs school. We'll see regression, and we expect to see some regression in these things as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's keeping that in your mind always. Could this be part of trauma? Could trauma be part of this?
Right.
Keeping that perspective is important.
That's helpful. And so when we think about the flip side of what works, what have you seen not work in intervention that you hope that folks avoid this fall?
Well, one thing I've seen is where educators get really excited and leaders get really excited because they see this one intervention that they test piloted with a handful of kids and it worked. And so then they apply it all the way across the board because this is going to be our answer and this is going to be it. And again, that isn't, there's no special sauce. It's the making of the sausage, so they say. It's not one size fits all, and there's no secret intervention that's going to be your solution. Two, I've seen a lot of school leaders choose interventions as their tier one curriculum. And I think it's really, really important that we keep in mind that you're not exposing children to grade level text and grade level material and challenging them in that way. Just because a child has significant needs doesn't mean that you cannot expose them to grade level text. Yes, it's hard. Yes, you need to provide scaffolding. Yes, you need to help them work through it, but you've got to expose them to it.
Mm-hmm. Love those key points. So I'm hearing a strong emphasis on considering unique needs of the child and remembering there's no silver bullet here, and then making sure that we expose kids to tier one and not lower our expectations or access to high quality instructional material, grade level standards.
Absolutely.
Great. Wonderful. And so anything else that you would want to impart in teachers and leaders as they head into the fall, or anything else that you want folks to keep in mind?
I really hope leaders beyond those of beyond me and the other school leaders, I'm thinking more leaders in legislation and governors think really hard about bringing children back in the fall and who needs to be brought back and who can participate in distance learning. I feel strongly that students with special needs, with significant special needs, need to be in a classroom in smaller classroom settings and given restrictions and guidelines so that we keep everybody safe. But if we really want learning to happen, we need to be here. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think the same is true for K2. Those need to be in-person experiences, and we need to modify what we're doing so that we can bring in those students. And then students that are capable and that are able to do distance learning, we can modify for them as well.
Mm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective today. It was so great to learn from you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.